share my screen. So here we have the text, and again, what I want to talk about here is, let me go back just a little bit. Work my way back through these notes. So this is the end of the, let me see if I can, yeah, okay. Yes, okay. So here we are back at the end of the last chapter, chapter 6. And we've seen that the city of Jericho has been destroyed. So the people marched around it, and they blew the shofar, and the walls came down. And Joshua said, "Shout, the Lord your God has given the town to you, and the town and all that is in it shall be under the ban to the Lord." And that's what I want to talk about to begin with today, and that is the idea of the ban. In Hebrew, it's Cherem. Right? So they are under Cherem, except for Rahav. She was the one, you recall, who welcomed the scouts, and they made them promise that they would look out for her. Since she hid the scouts, only her you must keep from the band, lest you covet and take of the band and put the children of Israel under the band and stir up trouble for them. All the silver, gold, and vessels of bronze and iron are holy to the Lord. They should be entered into the treasury. And I'm going to jump down and looking down here, and they put under the ban everything that was in the town, from men to women, from lad to elder, the ox, the sheep, and the donkey by the edge of the sword. So this is Cherem. They are to execute every living thing in the town, and they're not allowed to take anything of gold or silver, any spoil whatsoever from the town. Everything is to be completely destroyed, and any material property is now devoted to God. No human being can use it. So now we come to chapter 7, and we get this little paragraph at the beginning. And the Israelites violated the Cherem, and Achan, the son of Carmi, the son of Zabdi, the son of Zerah, from the tribe of Yehuda, took from the ban, and God's wrath flared against the Israelites. Okay, so let's talk about this ban. And really the question is what we do with this as modern people, and how do we understand it, this call for genocide and wholesale destruction of every human being, every animal, everything that is in these towns as the Israelites continue their conquest. And this, I think the first thing that you could say is that it's very hard to judge these actions by modern standards. That was a very different world. Now, the problem, of course, is that God seems to command it. I'll come back to that, but it was a very different world, and this kind of behavior, we know, was common in the ancient world. There is a cella. It's like a plaque that was discovered. This was from these ancient peoples, and I forgot who. They worshipped the god Kamosh, and when they had a great victory, they set up this memorial plaque to memorialize their victory, and in the plaque, it says that they took every living thing in the communities and they slaughtered them and destroyed them in honor of Kamosh, in honor of their god. So kind of thing happened, and was acceptable in those days, was unremarkable in those days. And of course, this kind of genocide was practiced again and again over history. It's not just in antiquity. You can think about the Crusaders, who on their way through the Rhineland, on their way to fight the Muslims in Jerusalem and recapture the city, slaughtered entire Jewish communities. Why do we need to wait there to get rid of the infidels? And of course, we can think about the Nazis. And even in this country, what we did to the native populations. You may recall the phrase, the only good Indian is a dead Indian. This idea that you conquer the people and exterminate them. None of this excuses this. And certainly it is deeply offensive to us, and I think most modern people, and perhaps particularly to us as Jews, having suffered through this kind of attempted extermination. So how do we deal with this? How does the Jewish tradition deal with stuff like this? And the rabbis in the Talmud, who are the inheritors of these biblical traditions, but who really create a new religion. I think it's really fair to say that. With the destruction of the temple, Jews no longer have that place to worship, and Judaism becomes reconstructed in a way. So no longer is there sacrifice. Now there will be Torah study and prayer. And as part of the rabbinic project, I think, is to deal in some way or another with these difficult passages. And so, the most famous case perhaps is the stubborn and rebellious child who is, according to the Bible, supposed to be executed. The parents make a profession and go to the judges, and the child is then put to death. The rabbis think this is just awful. They say it never actually happened. No child was ever executed. And through some clever reading of the verses, they managed to eliminate the law entirely. Similarly, the rabbis want to see the law here, the Cherem, as essentially a dead letter. They say, yeah, that was then, but like the command to exterminate the Amalekites. There are no Amalekites left. There are no Canaanites left. Whatever this was, and God commanded it, so we're not going to think about that. But whatever it was, it's no longer operable in our times. God no longer requires it of us, and to the extent that God did, God had God's reasons. So later rabbinic tradition, and by the way, you see that opinion, there's a rabbi in the first century whose name is Yehoshua ben Hananiah, and he explicitly says, these things are dead letters. Now, by the time you get to Maimonides, which is 1,000 years later, Maimonides completely reads all this, going all the way back to biblical times. So for him, it's not enough simply to say it's a dead letter. What Maimonides says is, well, actually, the people were given a choice. They could leave, they could make peace, or there will be a war in which they're exterminated. Now, Maimonides is reading this into the biblical text. He includes it in his laws of warfare. But it's clear that for him, the idea that the Bible would require this is simply not acceptable. And so he reads it that way. I think it's worth asking, why would this exist? Setting aside all of these apologetics, because that's what they are, right? Oh, there are none of those people anymore, or really, you didn't have to exterminate them. And by the way, as we're going to see when we get to chapter 8, there is evidence that they didn't do it. The Israelites at that time actually didn't do this. Nonetheless, it's there. It's God's command, as we're going to see. Somebody gets punished for not keeping to it. So why was it there at all? How can we understand this? And I think there are two things we can say about it. The first is that the Bible, and particularly the book of Deuteronomy, and we saw this, sees paganism as extremely attractive, that the Jewish people will easily be led astray to the worship of alien gods. The book of Numbers is very concerned about the Midianites who do lure, Midianite women who lure the Jews away, and they begin to become idolaters. Right. And I think one way of understanding this, and it's pretty explicit in Deuteronomy, is you have to exterminate these people because otherwise they will be a kind of cancer inside, destroying the people and leading them away from the covenant with God. So I think that's the first reason, and it's the most explicit. The other thing is that since this is God's war, and God's fighting it, and it is a kind of holy war, the people the Israelites should have no benefit from it, right? They're not allowed to keep spoils of war. They're not allowed to take captives who would become their slaves. And so there is a sense here that this war is different, and they should not, other than inheriting the land, they should not have any benefit from it. Before we get into the text, I also want to talk about something else which is also called Cherem, which comes to us from rabbinic times. But before we do that, I'm going to stop sharing. Any questions or thoughts about this idea of Cherem in the Bible? Myra, you can go first. You have to unmute though.
Yeah, I haven't been, unfortunately, at all the lectures. My question, not about Cherem, but what was it about Joshua that singled him out to be the guy?
So I would, and if you go back, by the way, if you want to listen to the recording that I did at the very beginning of the book, I go through this, and we looked at a variety of passages from the Torah in which we see Joshua. Joshua was Moses' servant. He was kind of his aide-de-camp, his second in command. So he really knew about these things. He was a military leader. We see that early on. He's the one who is there when they fight their first battle against the Amalekites just after coming out of Egypt. He was one of the scouts that went in, one of the only two who survive from, he's the one of only two people who actually experienced the Exodus, who then got to go into the promised land. So he has a lot of experience, more experience than most people. He has military experience. And he is Moses's anointed successor. I think that there is a sense there that God, just as God was with Moses, God will be with Joshua. That's just in brief, but if you go back and listen to that first.
Yeah, no, okay. They don't know if he really existed or not. That's just the Bible, right?
Yes, so sure. I think most historians believe he did. People who look at antiquity. It's hard, there is no reason to assume he didn't. That's not to say that all the details of the story are necessarily factual. Just, one of the things we've been seeing is that Moses replicates things, Joshua replicates things that Moses did. And one of the Moses, split the sea, and Joshua splits the Jordan, right? So I don't know that we need to assume that that happened. But I think in general, it's reasonable to assume that there was a Joshua.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Anything about, Saul?
Last Shabbat, the rabbi at my shul was talking about Purim and the Megillah. He was referring to chapter 8, all the destruction and all the violence against the followers of Haman. So that was a complete massacre.
Yeah.
And he questioned it.
Yeah, by the way, I mean, there's nothing in the book of Esther that suggests that this was some kind of cherem, that this was, except the hint that they were descendants of the Amalekites, right? But beyond that, it doesn't seem, and there's no sense that they're all wiped out, that everybody, and they fight for 2 days. That's it, right? They're not conquering. I think it's very different. It's also troubling. But I think it's not as troubling because there's no sense in which it was divinely commanded. These are people who were, after all, fighting for their lives. So, I think it's different. Good. Other comments, questions, Sandy?
So, I have a question and a comment, if that's okay. All right. The question is, could you please remind me? I missed this. How God commanded it? Did God commanded this to happen?
So I can't quite cite you a verse, but we do see it in Deuteronomy, where God says, when you go into the land, this is what you need to do. And the whole assumption here is, as we're going to see, because what we're going to see in this chapter is somebody violated it, and God is punishing the people for it, right? So clearly the sense here is this is a divine command, and if you don't fulfill it, you will be punished.
So it's not like God spoke to Joshua or those what are those Urim and whatever
the Urim and Tumim. It's funny you mention it because we're going to talk about them today also.
It's not like. Yeah.
We don't have, right, there's no explicit command to Joshua, go in there, wipe these people out. But it is implicit and it's explicit to Moses. So it doesn't seem to be any question from the point of view of the Bible that this is God's command. And that's part of why it's so problematic. And you had a comment also.
Yeah, well, your examples of the Crusaders and the Indians in the United States, I mean, well, they all came after. So in a sense, the Bible is sort of setting a precedent in a bad way, right? Wouldn't you say?
I don't know that the fact that the biblical account exists, yes. One could look at it and say, oh, this is how you go in and conquer.
Yeah.
I would set the Nazis aside from that. And I would also point out that there's no sense in which, if you were taking the Bible seriously, it forbids plunder. Right? In this country, for example, they're very happy to take the stuff of the Native Americans, right? So I don't think it's quite the same thing, but I take your point. I do, that this could be viewed. It isn't by the Jewish tradition, explicitly not, but yes, others could point back to it and see it. Now, and I say it isn't, but there are exceptions. Individuals who looked at it, and what was his name? Baruch Goldstein, who goes in and massacres people, saw himself as acting in the spirit of this, and I have to say you could find other examples also, but this is not a matter of official policy in any sense, which it is here. Okay,
you.
I just, because I thought it would be interesting, I want to spend just a couple of minutes on this is all called Cherem, right? You put these things in Cherem, these people, you destroy them completely. The word Cherem, which is, it's hard to say what it means. In the Bible, it seems to mean something like sanctified, right? That these things are set aside for God somehow. You're not allowed to take them. But Cherem comes also to mean that they're sort of banned. Right? You're not allowed to have them. They're banned from you. And the rabbis pick up on this idea of a ban, and they turn Cherem into what we would call excommunication. So I want to just for a minute talk about that and rabbinic Cherem. So the idea, the classic case is that someone shows disrespect or contempt for a rabbinic court. It doesn't follow their injunctions, or perhaps it's disrespectful to an individual rabbi. And that person, initially it's called nidui, can be put under a kind of ban meant to last 30 days, during which hopefully it will be effective and the person will repent. If they don't, then they're put under Cherem, which is a much more stringent and can last for a very long time, until the rabbis lift this ban. What did it mean to be put into Cherem? It meant that the Jewish community will have no contact with you. You're not, an Israelite is not an Israelite anymore, right? A Jew is not to come within 6 feet of such a person. You have no commerce with them. You can't buy from if they're merchants, you can't buy from them. They're not permitted within the communal prayer structure. They couldn't be counted to a minyan. It's not excommunication in the sense that we're saying, okay, they're no longer Jews, but they no longer have the benefit of being part of the Jewish community. And this is meant as a kind of coercion to get them to accept the authority of the community. Perhaps the most, there's been there's a kind of folklore that developed around this idea of excommunication. And you probably, I don't know if you know this, but there are like people who talk about, oh, they lit black candles and all kinds of other things. But there's no sense of that in traditional texts. The most famous person, I think, to be put in Cherem was Spinoza, right? Who had what were viewed as heretical ideas, and the Jewish community in Amsterdam actually imposes this ban on him, because, I mean, going through his ideas would be somewhat complicated, but he didn't accept sort of the God of the Torah. He was much more interested in sort of the divine nature of nature. Right? That nature was kind of his God. It's complicated, and I'm not a philosopher, so I won't attempt. But Spinoza is, and the last thing I'll say about this is that there are some modern rabbis, for example, in Mea Shearim in Jerusalem, who get together, and sometimes they will pronounce Cherem on someone for something, and then they put up big posters on the walls of the quarter there, announcing that so and so is in Cherem. They also put a bunch of rabbis, conservative rabbis, in the Cherem. I don't remember why. And one of my colleagues said that he was very upset to be left off the list. He felt that he didn't have quite the stature that he thought he did, because they didn't consider him important enough to put into Cherem. Last thing I'll say about Cherem, there is a famous Cherem. This goes back to the end of the 10th, beginning of the 11th century. A rabbi by the name of Rabbeinu Gershon. Rabbeinu Gershon issued a series of edicts which are called Cherem, the Cherem of Rabbeinu Gershon, because someone who did not follow them would be in Cherem. And so there were 4 things. The first was, you can't divorce your wife without her consent. So it's a major thing, because if you look at the biblical model, it says, even the rabbinic model, you find something about your wife that you don't like, you have to pay her ketubah. You can't just throw her out, but she doesn't seem to get a say in that. Rabbeinu Gershon says, can't do it, right? She doesn't want it. Now, there are ways that you could try to influence her, but ultimately you can't do it. Secondly, no polygamy. Not clear how widely practiced polygamy was among Jews. We see it in the biblical period, certainly. There are those who suggest that these two go together. If you say to a man that he can't divorce his wife without her consent, he could then say, okay, I'll just take another wife, right? I won't divorce, right? So this really, in some ways, helps to reinforce the other. The third is that you're not allowed to read somebody else's mail. A sealed letter, right? I don't know, I guess this is something people were doing, but that sense of privacy is inherent. And then the fourth thing, and this I think is interesting because it says something about the times, that someone who is Jewish and converts out, right, declares themselves to be a Christian, because that's the world in which he lives, should be welcomed back into the community when he acknowledges that he was wrong, does tshuva. Right? You don't just say, well, that was, beyond the pale. This person is no longer a Jew. He's a Jew, and a Jew who repents. So that's perhaps the most famous example of that kind of cherem. And now we're going to get to the text. Before we do, any questions, Francesca?
So does this mean someone who is Jewish renounces our faith, decides to become another one, and then undoes it to come back? Is that what this is?
Yes. Well, but remember this. You can't stop being a Jew. You
That's
can be a bad Jew, right? You can be a sinful Jew. If you convert to Judaism or you have a Jewish mother, classically, it's a one-way door. You get in, you're not allowed out. Because it's who you are. It's a matter of identity. It's not just a faith that you profess, right?
Mhm.
So you can't, someone says, well, so-and-so became a Christian, right? They're still Jewish, right? They may not acknowledge it. And then, the question is, so what happens if you had, let's say, your grandmother converted to Christianity on your mother's side, and then she had a woman who was raised as a Christian, and now the grandchild wants to be considered Jewish. They have to convert? Classically not. It might, right? Because the grandmother and the mother were still Jews. Now, often rabbis will say, yes, they don't have to convert, but at least they should go to the mikveh. There should be some way of marking it, but no, can't get out. Once you're in, once
it.
to the door. Yes, Sandy.
Thank you.
But Rabbi, is that referring, is someone who's Jewish who then says that they convert to Christianity and then they come back. Is that referring to persecutions over the years where
It
people were
is-
allowed to do that?
The rationale doesn't matter. Yes, I mean, we can certainly think of examples of Jews who, you know, who rather than leave Spain, for example, professed Christianity, you know, the Moranos, and nonetheless, they were considered to be Jews. There were interesting questions when they came to other communities, when they finally did leave, whether how accepted they were. There's a lot written about that, but still, technically speaking, there's no question that they're Jewish. Okay, yeah, Carol, unmute. You're muted.
So if someone converts, then, and they go back to Christianity for whatever reason, we're keeping them as a prisoner? I mean,
No, we're not keeping them as a prisoner.
well, they still have to be.
I mean, you know, we're simply saying they profess what they profess. We can't keep them from being Christian, going to church, taking communion,
Right.
they do. But as far as we're concerned, you could say we don't respect that. We don't respect that decision, right? As far as we're concerned, you know, they're Jews behaving badly. Okay, I want to get to some text today. Though I hope you found this interesting, and I think it was important to supply some context to this idea. And now we're going to see an example. Oops, that's not what I want. I want to share my screen. Okay, so Joshua, this is right after the Battle of Jericho. Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai, another town, which is by Beit Aven to the east of Beit El. And he said to them, go and spy out the land, right? So this is exactly what they did with respect to Jericho. The scouts were sent to scout out the land. And presumably, perhaps this is how the conquest went, that they would send scouts in first. The men went, spied out Ai. They came back to Joshua and said, let not the whole people go. About 2,000 or 3,000 men should go and strike Ai. Do not weary the whole people there, for they are few. In other words, we don't have to go the whole army. Don't send the whole army. It's not that big a deal. So 3,000 men went, and they fled before the men of Ai. So they're routed, this contingent. Unlike what happened in Jericho, they are absolutely routed. And they strike them down and they pursue them from before the gate as far as Shivarim and struck them down on the slope. And the consequence of this is that the people, that is the people of Israel, their heart failed and turned to water. It's really a stunning kind of metaphor, right? Joshua himself is just really distressed. He tears his robes, right? This is a symbol of mourning. I mean, to this day, we have this idea when someone loses someone that they tear their clothing as a symbol of mourning, or often today we'll put on a ribbon and tear the ribbon, but it means the same thing. Flings himself on his face, the ground before the ark of the Lord, till evening, and he and the elders of Israel, and they put dust on their hands. It's another ancient symbol of mourning. Think about sackcloth and ashes, right? These are the ashes, though here it's just dust. And Joshua now says to God, alas, O Master Lord, why did you insist on bringing these people across the Jordan to give us to the hand of the Amorites and to destroy us? Would that we had been content to dwell across the Jordan, right? So Joshua here he sounds like the rebellious people in the wilderness, right? he's like, why did you do this to us? We could have stayed there. Remember the 2.5 tribes who do take the land on the other side of the Jordan? He said, why didn't we just stay there? So he says, I beseech you, my master, what shall I say after Israel has turned tail before his enemies, and the Canaanites and the dwellers of the land will hear and draw around us and cut our name off from the earth? And what will you do for your great name? Right? So this, in other words, we're going to be destroyed. And what about you? Because all of this, part of this, is about your reputation. And here Joshua is using the same argument that Moses used against God when God threatened to destroy the people. Moses said, what will people say that you brought them out of Egypt just to kill them in the wilderness, right? So here again, this is just one more place where we see Joshua as the inheritor of Moshe, using some of the same language and doing similar acts to what Moses did. And now God talks to Joshua, get up. He said, rise up doesn't, I think, quite capture. It's like, get up. Why are you on your face? Israel has offended and broken my commandment that I charged them, and also has taken from the ban and stolen and denied it and put it in their bags. And notice this, you can sense God's anger here, right? They've taken from the Cherem and they've stolen it and they've denied it and they've, right? And the Israelites have not been able to stand up against their enemies. They turn tail before their enemies, for they themselves have come under they're now in the Cherem. What God is saying. So the consequence, this is the rabbis would say, midah keneged midah, measure for measure, what goes around comes around, right? They violated it, and now they themselves are bad. I will not continue to be with you if you don't destroy the banned things from your midst. Sanctify the people and say, sanctify yourselves for tomorrow. For thus the Lord God of Israel has said, there are banned things in your midst, O Israel. You will not be able to stand up against your enemies until you remove the banned things from your midst. And you shall draw near in the morning, according to your tribes, and it shall be that the tribe on which the Lord lets the lot fall shall draw near according to its clans, and the clans on which the Lord lets the lot fall shall draw according to its households. And then finally it works its way down the household to its men, and then the one on whom the lot falls for taking the banned things shall be burned in fire, him and all that is his, because he broke the Lord's covenant, because he has done this scurrilous thing in Israel. So we have a process where God, through a kind of divine oracle, is going to show who it is who is actually guilty. And this probably, though it doesn't say it, was done with the use of the Urim and Tumim, these things that are on the breastplate of the king, of the high priest, which can be used as lots that are drawn. And so first you have a lot, 12 lots, and you pick one, and that must be the tribe. And you work your way down through divisions until you come down to an individual who has violated the Cherem, right? And that individual goes to Zerach, and then the clan of Zerach and Zabdi, and finally you come down to Achan, the son of Carmi, the son of Zerach of the tribe of Judah. This is the guy. This is why they lost. And Joshua took him and the silver. Oh, so sorry, I've skipped. I don't know how I got there. Whoops. I lost my place. And Joshua says, my son shall honor, pray to the Lord God of Israel and make confession to him. Tell me, pray, what you have done. Do not conceal it from me. So he's speaking softly to him. He calls him his son. He uses this language, tell me, don't conceal it. And this seems to enable Achan to confess. Indeed, it is I who offended against the God of Israel, and thus, and so I have done. I saw a booty, a fine fur mantle, 200 shekels of silver, an ingot of gold, 50 shekels in weight. I coveted them, I took them, and they are buried in the ground within my tent, and the silver is underneath them. And Joshua sent messengers, and they ran to the tent, and there it was buried in his tent with the silver underneath. And they took these from within the tent, they brought them to Joshua, to all the Israelites, and he presented them before the Lord. And Joshua took Achan, the son of Zerach, and the silver, and the mantle, and the ingot of gold, and his sons and his daughters, and his ox, and his donkey, and his flock, and his tent, and all that was his, and all Israel was with him. And he brought them to the valley of Achor. The valley now is going to be named after this person. And Joshua says, even if you have stirred up trouble for us, the Lord shall stir up trouble for you. And Israel pelts him with stones. He gets stoned and burned them, probably the objects now, in fire, and pelted then the burned objects with stones. They piled over him a great heap of stones to this day. And the Lord turned back from his blazing wrath. And therefore the name is called the Valley of Achor to this day. So we have this place, and you can go to Israel. And, one of the reasons the book of Joshua is important to modern Israelis is because these places are in the land and you can go to them. And presumably, there is this huge pile of stones, which, whoever wrote this and whenever they wrote it is ascribing back to this incident. So, very troubling incident. What we're going to see next is the Battle of Ai. Now that, God turned away and shows favor again. And God said to Joshua, don't be afraid. Take with you all the combat troops, not just a small number. Go up to Ai. See, I've given into your hand the king of Ai, his people, his town, his land. And you shall do to Ai as you did to Jericho and to his king. Only its booty and its cattle you may plunder. Now, this is really interesting, I think, because the idea of the Cherem has now been modified. The people are put to the sword, but the animals and the cattle can be taken by the soldiers for their benefit. Now, the text doesn't say why this change, but one could intuit, in fact, that having seen what happened with Achan and his taking this, God is taking into account. Remember the word covet. He coveted that this is sort of a concession to human nature. The people still have to be destroyed. They could lure into idolatry, but now the soldiers are entitled to take booty. So, set up for yourself an ambush against the town. This is set up for yourself an ambush against the town. Joshua rose up, all the combat troops with him to go to Ai. He chose 30,000 men, sturdy warriors, sent them out at night. And Joshua said to them, see, you are to lie in ambush against the town behind the town. Don't keep far away from the town. All of you must be on ready. And I and the troops that are with me, we shall draw near to the town. So when they come out towards us, before we will flee from them. right? This is almost like a reenactment of what happened before. They're going to pretend to be routed, and they will come after us till we draw them away from the town, for they will think they're fleeing as before. And you will rise up from the ambush, take hold of the town, and the Lord your God will give it into your hand, and you will seize the town, set fire to the town according to the word of the Lord. So I charge you. And Joshua sent them off, and they went to the ambush. They stayed between Beth El and Ai to the west of Ai. Joshua spent the night among his troops. He rose early in the morning. And by the way, this is a slight difference between Joshua and Moses. When the army goes out in the time of Moses, he's not the warrior. He's not there with the troops. He says to the elders of Israel, he marshals his troops. He and the elders of Israel before the troops, and all the combat troops went with him and approached and came opposite the town. They camped to the north, the ravine between them. And he took 5,000 men and set them as an ambush between Beit El and Ai to the west of the town. They put the troops, the whole camp, to the north of the town, and its covert contingent to the west. And Joshua spent the night there. And it happened, the king of Ai saw it, that the men of the town hurried early in the morning, came toward Israel to do battle, he and his troops at the set place opposite the Arava. He did not know there was an ambush, and Joshua and all the men were routed before them. So they run away, fled the road to the wilderness, and the troops that were in the town were mustered to pursue him, were drawn away from the town. Not a man remained in the town in Ai who did not go after Israel. And the Lord said to Joshua, reach out with the javelin that is in your hand towards Ai. In your hand I shall give it. And Joshua reached out with the javelin that was in his hand toward the town. And the ambush rose quickly from the place and ran as his hand reached out. They entered the town and they took it. So this is interesting on a couple of levels. You can see now this is a military tactic that the people will fool the people of Ai. And when is it that the ambush takes place? So that the people of Ai will now be caught between one army and another, or one part of Joshua's army and another. When Joshua picks up his javelin, they will see this symbol, and that will be the symbol to go that the ambushers should go and attack. Now, what's striking about this is it reminds us of the first battle that the Israelite people has just coming out of Egypt, where Moses raises up his staff. And as a result of that, God is with the people and they're able to win the battle. This is one more evidence of, reinforcing the idea that Joshua is Moses' successor, but it's also different. This is just a javelin. Moses' rod was, the instrument at the Red Sea and so on. Joshua is not Moses. This is sort of a weak approximation, but it does show that he is the chosen one. And as a result, they looked behind them and saw, and smoke was rising from the town towards the heavens, and they had no place to flee. While the troops had fled to the wilderness, became their pursuers. And Joshua and all Israel saw that the ambushers had taken the town. The smoke rose from the town. They struck down the men of Ai and those who came out the town toward them. So they were in the midst of Israel, who were on both sides. And they struck them down and left among them no remnant or survivor. And the king of Ai they caught alive and brought him to Joshua. And it happened when Israel finished killing all the inhabitants of the Ai in the field, in the wilderness, all of them by the edge of the sword, to the last of them, all Israel went back to Ai, struck it with the edge of the sword. All who fell that day, men, women, came to 12,000. And Joshua did not pull back his hand until that he reached out with the javelin, until they put all the inhabitants of Ai under the ban. Only the cattle and the booty they plundered according to the word of the Lord. And Joshua burned Ai and turned it into a heap of devastation. And he impales the king till evening, and then they take his corpse from the pole and they fling it at the entrance of the town gate, and they put over it a pile of stones. And then Joshua is going to do a number of things, which really reflect back to what we read in the book of Deuteronomy was to be done when the people enter the land. And we'll pick up with that next time, because I want to look at those parallels. In the meantime, questions, comments, Francesca?
Why was God wanting to destroy that whole town? What's the part of the story I'm missing?
Well, they want to destroy all the towns
Because,
because they are conquering the land, which will
Oh.
be their land.
oh, okay,
This is the conquest.
all right.
It does turn out, and we're going to see this next time, not so simple. And in fact, the destruction is not so simple. There's clear evidence that they did not succeed. That we see it here, we'll see it in the next chapter, in a very interesting ruse, which is perpetrated by some of the inhabitants against the Israelites. And then later on, when you see a list of where they conquered and where they didn't conquer, not at all clear. It seems actually that the reality was an intermixing of the two populations.
It seems awfully extreme to have to murder everyone in the town to conquer it.
Yeah, well, that's not the point. It's not that they need to murder them to conquer it. That's really a separate concern. The concern is to obliterate them because they will be a lure to the people and lead them to idolatry.
Okay,
Okay, other comments? Sandy?
So Rabbi, do you find the Urim and is it the Thummim? Am I saying Thummim or?
Urim and Thummim, yeah.
Do you find that troubling? Do you find that a form of idolatry?
So God needs to make God's will known. Right? First of all, they're not worshiping, right? They are a divinely sanctioned means of determining what it is that God wants the people to do. And remember here, God is not speaking to Joshua in the way he spoke to Moses, right? And we will eventually not have Urim and Thummim, we will have prophets. And they will deliver, the divine word. So I don't think it's idolatry because they're not worshipped. There is something that's sort of a magical quality to them. They do seem to be sort of a Ouija board in some ways, but the assumption is that they are simply just, it is a way of divining the will of the divine. Small d followed by large d, right? So no, I don't think so. Yeah, go ahead.
Weren't there at that time, because in the Bible, in the stories, as maybe Deuteronomy or Numbers, there were courts that already established, weren't there, that could decide things?
Courts could interpret what was already said.
Mhm.
We have a body of legislation, and now we have to, apply it. That is different than this, which is not something that has been previously revealed.
I see. Thank you.
Other comments, questions? Carol? You have to unmute.
I find it extremely disturbing that the king was impaled. I mean,
So the idea of impaling, which we also see in the Purim story, right? It's Haman and his. This seems to be not so much the way he is executed as a kind of disgrace that is placed upon him. I mean, by the way, other people are being run through with swords. I don't know that there's a great deal of difference. you know, in terms of they're both fairly quick deaths. But I don't know. I don't know enough about impaling to know. Saul.
Yeah, I just want to say, I was reading the Hebrew, and the word "vayilacated ha'ir," you know, in Sepharia, it says they took the city, or he took the city. It's actually they captured the city. So some of the English in Sepharia leaves something to be desired.
Yeah, well, I think that they're simply different translations. So I'm not sure what "vihilakate" actually, how we would translate it. They seem to be pretty synonymous in English, right? You capture a city or you take a city. I'm not sure that there's much actual difference as to, I mean, one translation chooses one word and another translation chooses another, but the import of the word itself is pretty much a synonym. So I don't, it's a matter of word choice. There are places sometimes where you read translations and they really mean different things. So to give you an example, the mantle, the gold and the silver, he captures this, takes this mantle. In general translations, it's Shinar, a mantle of Shinar, which is a location, and is not so much describing the mantle as where it comes from, right? Which was, a place known for quality, expensive items, right? But Alter translates it as, I think, fur, right? Using a different sense of the same Hebrew. They're different translations, right? It's, and if you read Alter's notes, you can see why he says what he says. But so I'm not saying that translations aren't different. I'm just saying I don't think this is the case of it. All right, there's nothing else. We're going to pick up the story next time. This time, the Israelites fool the people of Ai. Next time, they themselves will be fooled. So I look forward to seeing you then. Have a good week, everybody.
Thank you. You too, Rabbi.
Thank you.